The past 2, 3 years have been unbelievable in terms of changes in our industry, especially with rapidly surging load growth and affordability.
Northern Illinois has really become increasingly an important market when we're talking about the data center build out across the country.
It's both to advance the clean energy transition, but also help attract and retain the kind of businesses that we want to come here in Illinois.
Accounting for the data center and demand spike, building a modern grid with aging infrastructure in mind, strategizing for affordability and equity, and optimizing for reliability.
We have the power here in Illinois. They like to come here because of that reliability. They know that we are experts in integrating large loads. Number two, people. We have the workforce that can support data centers and high-tech type companies.
It's not every day that the CEO of one of the country's most important utilities opens their playbook to explain what the future holds. Well, today isn't just any other day. I'm Kinsey Grant Baker, this is Power Perspectives, and we are about to take a deep dive into the strategies ComEd is deploying to plan for an uncertain energy future. I'm joined today by none other than Gil Quiniones, President and CEO of ComEd. And you probably know ComEd already, but just to make sure that we are crossing our T's and dotting our I's, they provide power to more than 4 million residential and business customers in Chicago and across most of Northern Illinois. ComEd was named the most reliable utility in America by PA Consulting, and it does north of about $7 billion in annual revenue these days. Now, as for Gil, he was previously president and CEO of the New York Power Authority, the nation's largest state-owned electric utility, and he did a 16-year stint at ComEd. So safe to say he knows his stuff. Gil, welcome to Power Perspectives. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you very much for having me, Kinsey.
Of course, I'm thrilled to have you on the show. It's always exciting to get somebody with a resume as impressive as yours. We have a lot to dig into today, a lot to cover, but I want to start by just mentioning for the audience, this is a bit of a full circle moment for Power Perspectives. You were one of our earliest guests, episode 25, all the way back in 2020. I wasn't even here. A lot has changed over the last half decade or so, both for us, for you. If you don't mind, can you sum up in a sentence or two what you've been up to?
Well, first, I'm thrilled to be back. So, as you said, I was part of your podcast, I think just before COVID.
Wild.
And so, since then, about 4.5 years ago, I came here to lead ComEd. Uh, it's been great. As you know, the past 2, 3 years have been just unbelievable in terms of fundamental changes in our industry, especially with rapidly surging load growth and all the challenges that comes with that, especially affordability.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly has been a time of both enormous opportunity and a time of enormous challenge for the utility industry, which is a lot of what we're going to talk about today. I want to spend some time looking ahead to how your team is solving some of these big challenges, big problems. Before we dig into that, with this mention of these fundamental shifts in the industry, I'd love to really root the conversation in understanding some of your biggest priorities, thoughts, themes in the current landscape, with system risk, demand growth. Is there any one theme that seems to jump off the page that really keeps you up at night as a CEO?
Well, it's this rapid change. As I mentioned, if you look at the history of utilities in the US, our load, customer demand, has been flat over the last 10, 15 years. At ComEd, our highest peak in history was recorded in July of 2011, 23.7 gigawatts. And it's been flat since then until really 2, 3 years ago when we started growing 2, 3% a year. And that change is a massive shift. It doesn't sound a lot. 2, 3% a year actually in our industry is a lot. And then with everything else, with inflation across the economy, affordability is becoming a big issue. Data centers, et cetera, are coming in. We're a top five market. And so those are the challenges, but at the same time, they're good opportunities for all of us.
Which I think is a good segue to talk about what we're going to spend most of this conversation covering, which is the latest 4-year plan that ComEd just released. So we're going to dig into the details. I've broken it into about 4 parts that I really want to make sure that we cover today. But at the high level, the 30,000 foot view, what is the goal of this latest 4-year plan from ComEd?
So we in Illinois, we're required to submit 4-year grid investment plans. We're in the middle of the first grid plan. So that's for calendar years 2024 through 2027. What we filed last January is the second grid plan, which will cover calendar years 28 all the way to 31. And the purpose really of that grid plan is to accomplish two broad goals of the state. One is to make sure that we are along the path of the clean energy transition that was codified in law back in September 2020, for 2021, called the Climate Equitable Jobs Act. And the second pillar is to make sure that we're advancing the economic development goals of the state of Illinois. We're in the process of attracting businesses here, especially manufacturing, including some high tech companies like quantum and also life sciences. So it's both to advance the clean energy transition, but also to help attract and retain the kind of businesses that we want to come here in Illinois.
Yeah, it's helpful context to start this conversation with understanding really what's underpinning all of these goals and efforts and the plans that you've put forth, and to recognize too how difficult it is to plan ahead to 2031 when so much is changing so quickly. So, with that in mind, we're gonna try to break this into, as I mentioned, a couple of key parts in terms of understanding this next 4-year plan. So, accounting for the data center and demand spike, building a modern grid with aging infrastructure in mind, strategizing for affordability and equity, and optimizing for reliability. So let's dig in and start with that first one. This data center dilemma, you mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation, Northern Illinois has really become, I would say, a magnet for data centers. It is increasingly an important market when we're talking about the data center build out across the country. Can you tell me a little bit more about what makes this region specifically or uniquely attractive when we're looking at hyperscale growth?
It's really, the three P's. It's people, it's power, number one, power, people, and place. We have the power here in Illinois. We're, as you mentioned, we're the most reliable utility in the United States. So they like to come here because of that reliability. They know that we are experts in integrating large loads. Number two, people. Midwest, we're the you know, capital of the middle of America, and we have great institutions here, great universities, uh, great national labs, and so we have the workforce that can support data centers and high tech type companies. And place, we're in the middle of the country. We have good fiber infrastructure. We're not subject to wildfire or hurricanes. We do have some tornadoes here, but relatively speaking, and with all of the water from the Great Lakes, it's a great place to have data centers. That's the reason why we're a top five market here.
Totally. This idea of power, people, and place is a really, I think, important way of putting it. Is it possible at all to contextualize this growth, this interest in terms of numbers, stats? Do you have any data points that can illustrate what the growth looks like?
So I mentioned to you before the highest peak demand recorded since the creation of ComEd in 1907 was 23.7 gigawatts. As we sit here today, Kinsey, we have about 100 or so applications for data centers proposals. They account for over 30,000 megawatts or over 30 gigawatts, probably even closer to 40. So it's almost double. It's almost double the highest peak of of our system, which is just staggering and a little bit unbelievable if you think about it. And they're still coming. We're still getting applications.
So how do you plan for that kind of unbelievable and staggering concentrated load growth, without running the risk of overbuilding or shifting costs to other customers? Can you tell me a little bit more about your general strategy for grid build out that can handle all of this interest from hyperscalers, all of this build out of data centers?
Yeah, and before I get there, aside from data centers, because of the economic development programs and initiatives of the state under the leadership of Governor Pritzker, we're starting to attract manufacturing. We have a large battery manufacturer that's coming in here, just about an hour south of Chicago. We have pharmaceuticals. We have Hyundai just announced they're going to expand here, and we have quantum. We're building the first quantum campus called Illinois Quantum and Microelectronics Park in the southeast part of Chicago. So all of that plus electrification, uh, EVs are happening here in EV charging stations. So all of that and data centers. And so with respect to data centers, we want to make sure that data centers are paying their fair share. So recently we submitted a proposed tariff that was approved by our commission here, the Illinois Commerce Commission, that will do two things. One, it increases the application fee. So if one wants to apply for a data center here, it could be within the range, depending on the size, from about $500,000 per application to $12 million per application just to apply, depending on the size of the data center. That's one. The second thing that we did here was we said, okay, we're going to study you in clusters or in groups. So most recently, our first cluster, we studied about between 7 and 10 applications for data centers. And we told each one of them, okay, here's what's going to take for you to connect to our grid. We need to do the following upgrades so that you can connect to the ComEd grid. And what we're going to do is for each one of you, we're going to estimate your revenues that you will pay us over the next 10 years. And we will require you to post a security in the form of a letter of credit. What that will do, if the load changes, if it doesn't show up or only part of the load show up, we can draw down from that letter of credit and not pass those costs to our other customers. So it prevents any cost shifting.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear a little bit more about how that's designed. I'm curious too to understand the perception or reaction from some of these hyperscalers themselves. I mean, as CEO, what is your relationship like with these potentially big clients, big hyperscalers who are coming to ComEd, but also facing the reality of this newly passed tariff that could, do things like increase the application fee and implement these cluster studies. What has the reception been like from the hyperscalers themselves?
It's been very good. We've had, we have a good relationship with the hyperscalers. In fact, the Data Center Coalition started here in Illinois, and it started with us. We hosted their first few meetings when they were formed. We have, before this growth spurt in data centers, we've had about 80 data centers here in Northern Illinois operating. And so when we passed this tariff, in fact, they want it because it removes the speculative applications in the pipeline. And so we've gotten nothing but good response from the data center developers and the hyperscalers.
Yeah. All right. Interesting to hear a little bit more about that. And I think that this idea of removing some of those speculative elements of grid build out, of building for this power reality of the future is a good segue to talk about how we build that literal grid itself. So let's now shift into the part of the conversation where we're going to focus on building this modern grid. And I think especially as it pertains to, as I mentioned at the beginning, managing aging infrastructure while also committing to new projects. The recent 4-year grid plan proposes about $15 billion in investments. Can you walk me through what some of the top priorities are and why within that commitment?
Well, I mentioned number one is we want to continue to advance the clean energy transition here in Illinois, meaning we want more distributed resources to be attached to the grid in the form of energy efficiency, demand flexibility, solar storage. We want more of that, electric vehicle charging stations, and also all the large loads and new business that we're seeing. At the same time, we want to continue to make the grid as reliable and resilient. You mentioned we're number one in reliability. That's very important because we have saved billions of dollars for our customers by avoiding outages here in Illinois. Um, so that's another component of it. So it's really reliability, resiliency, be able to accommodate new load and new business, and to be able to advance the clean energy transition and make our state attractive for businesses to come here. And that's really been something that's not talked about a lot, aside from data centers, where attracting reshoring of manufacturing. And I credit Governor Pritzker and his team. They really have been very active in that activity of attracting businesses here through the Illinois Economic Development Corporation. We are number one. Chicago is number one in terms of attracting businesses in the United States based on Site Selection magazine, and the state of Illinois is number two. And so it's really, again, we are an enabler. We are something that is required for that to happen.
Right. When it comes to building that grid that feels really enticing and, representative of the future of a lot of these businesses that Chicago and the state of Illinois are attracting to where you are, to your territory, how does aging infrastructure play into any of that? We're talking about a grid across the country, the majority of which was built many, many decades ago. Do you think at all about, the ways that you can upgrade what exists without sacrificing those newer investments? What does that balance look like in your view?
Oh, absolutely. That is a great question, because we have to balance both be able to connect new load, or what we call new business, and continue to invest in making our system reliable and resilient, which means we have to continue to do what we call life extension and modernization of the existing assets that are already here. We actually did a study with Argonne National Lab, which is close by from our headquarters. And we asked Argonne to model what the climate will look like between now and 2050 in Northern Illinois. And based on those projections, and by the way, this is very granular within 12 square kilometer, we can then adjust the kind of design standards, the sizing of the equipment that we put in. And that's very important, because we are a capital intensive company, and what we put in the ground, they last 10, 15, 20 years or even longer. So we're already changing the specs of what we're putting in the ground today based on the projection of what and how the climate will evolve here in Northern Illinois.
Yeah, interesting to hear how data might play a role in all of that. It also brings to mind for me the question too of generation. ComEd operates transmission and distribution only, no generation. When you're thinking about this grid of the future, could that reality shift at all? There I imagine are challenges and opportunities to being T&D only, especially when we're talking about the needs of this grid of the future, of customer bases of the future. I'm curious if that is ever, something that might shift strategically at ComEd or Exelon.
Yeah, it is a challenge for us because we only control the transmission and distribution system. With that said, meaning we don't have direct control on the generation, we have to rely on the PJM markets and all of the challenges that we all know about the PJM market. But I have to credit the state of Illinois. The state of Illinois, we were a little bit ahead of the curve. They passed the Climate Equitable Jobs Act. And then last year, they passed the Clean, Reliable Grid Act. And in both cases, it codified policy actions that will deal with the issues that you've raised in terms of generations. For example, this year, the state of Illinois will conduct an integrated resource plan. It will be led by the Illinois Commerce Commission with other state agencies, and it will identify what is that gap in generation if you look 10, 15 years out. And that law gave them the authority to then seek for solutions on how to fill that gap: generation, transmission, and demand side solution like virtual power plants, battery storage, solar, etc. So, the good thing in Illinois is even though we're a deregulated market, the policymakers here, especially the Illinois Commerce Commission, that they're a little bit ahead of the curve. They saw this challenge coming, and in partnership with the legislature, led by the executive branch, by the governor's office, they created the right policy responses to the challenges we're facing today.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, what you mentioned before, what's in your control versus what isn't in your control. It sounds like, policy and regulation are not always directly within the control of executives like yourself, but it is something that at least allows for a little bit of predictability when we're looking at building this future grid. Another element that you mentioned that I would love to hear more about with regard to what is in your control is the addition of distributed energy resources to the grid, that continued investment in DERs. Where do you find that kind of technology? Can you walk me through a little bit what that procurement what might look like, what jumps off the page to you, what is most interesting to you when kind of sussing out what tech might move the needle most for your market?
Yeah, love that question. We are the hottest market when it comes to community solar. Community solar, we have over 250 community solar installations operating right now and growing. You wouldn't think so, right? It's like you're in the Midwest, you would think it's got to be Texas, it's got to be California. But when it comes to community solar, we're number one. Rooftop solar, residential solar is also growing very fast here. And now, with that legislation that our state passed last year, we are waiting for a surge in battery storage. If you ask all battery storage developers, we are going to be that next hot market for battery storage. So, again, thoughtful policy responses are really stimulating the right technologies entering our market. ComEd also is probably one of the most advanced utilities in implementing DERMS, distributed energy resources management systems. We have a few of them already operating, and that enables us to integrate distributed energy resources much faster because we don't have to do all of the upgrades that a normal utility will do because we have a smart system, flexible system on how to integrate distributed energy resources.
It sounds like you have a pretty positive relationship with regulators and policymakers. What is your advice to other utilities who might want to mimic that kind of positive relationship? How do you maintain that, flow of communication or what are some best practices that have helped you to ensure that the right policies are put into place to help your business thrive, but also to help the entire region thrive?
Well, what I tell my employees, our team here, very simple. I say, seek to understand before seeking to be understood. What we've done here at ComEd is to really understand the policy agenda and the policy initiatives of the state government. So we see the executive branch, the governor and his team, and the legislature as partners. So we try and understand the policy goals, their policy initiatives, and then we design our programs, we design our grid investment plan to advance those policies. I think that is what's number one, the most important to do. Second, you gotta lean in. You really gotta lean in and be engaged and have an, as you said, open channel of communication. There, because there are always going to be challenges along the way. We just try to get better each day. We're better today than yesterday. We're going to be better next week than this week. Continue making positive deposits in our trust bank account so that our policymakers and our stakeholders believe in us when we make recommendations, when we make proposals on how to modernize the grid and how to connect all this new load that's coming into our system.
Yeah, I love that idea of the trust bank account. I think it also lends itself quite nicely to the third pillar of the conversation that I want to tackle today, which is the idea of strategizing for both affordability and equity across your customer base. it requires a lot of trust from the customer in ComEd and vice versa. So I would love to talk about it. Customers might hear what we talked about just now, $15 billion dollars in grid investments and think, wow, my bill is definitely going to go up. How do you think about affordability when implementing this plan and when talking about it publicly?
Well, we try and talk about the value of that $15 billion. That's a proposal. It's going to be looked at for 11 months this year with all of the interveners. We want to do that in a very transparent way. We are required in Illinois to justify every investment we make as cost effective. So that's the burden that we have as a utility. By the way, that $15 billion sounds a lot. If everything is approved, you're looking at about $2.50 to $3.50 increase in the monthly electric bill. We have one of the lowest electric bills for any large metropolitan area in the United States. And we will always try and meet all this new demand, new load, integrate distributed resources at the lowest possible cost. And that burden we need to demonstrate when we file that grid plan and when that grid plan is reviewed by the Illinois Commerce Commission. The other goal, two goals that we're required to do is number one, we have to look at the energy burden, that if the electric bill should not be more than 3% of the household's total income if they're heating with natural gas or some other fuel. And our current energy burden is less than 1.5%. So we have very low energy burden, our electric bills. We're always going to try and meet whatever we need to meet in terms of meeting load at the lowest possible cost. So we explain all of that in this process. At the same time, we are holding data centers and other large load accountable in terms of paying their fair share and making sure that they are not imposing additional costs to the rest of our ratepayers. And that's the reason why we have the transmission security agreement. And we also have a plethora of programs from energy efficiency to bill assistance programs. We have a new low income discount program, a LIHEAP, almost 200 million of bill assistance for those who are having a hard time in paying their electric bill. So it's a combination of things, but in the end, it's the value of the investments that we're making. Uh, Again, when we attract businesses in Illinois, we increase the tax base, we increase the number of jobs, we increase the economic vitality of our state. That benefits everybody.
Right,
And we are
absolutely.
an enabler for that.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's an interesting dynamic that I'm curious to hear your perspective on when I'm thinking about being in your shoes as the CEO of a major utility. Our team was at Distributech in February. A lot of people were talking about this, but there was a protest at Distributech from local ratepayers who were fed up with increasing prices, increasing utility bills every month. All of these efforts that you and your team are putting into place, these programs that exist, this burden that exists, all of this is in service of ensuring affordability for customers of all kinds. I'm curious if the customers themselves are receptive to that. Do they understand that part of the story, or do you think that sometimes there exists this dynamic of the utility doing their best to prioritize and ensure affordability, and the customers just not feeling like it's quite enough, or maybe not getting really any sort of inputs into what might impact their prices at the end of the month other than that bill itself? What is that like? How do you get from all of the prioritization and investment that your team is doing to the customers themselves to ensure that those customers feel like their needs are met and like they're being heard?
Well, the burden is on us. We have to prove that investments we are making provide value. If they don't feel and experience value, they won't be happy. We're number one in reliability. They know that if there is a storm here in northern Illinois, that the damage will be not as much compared to other areas. Number two, they know that our response is pretty quick. Last year, we had about 16 storms, and we restored 99% of our customers within 48 hours. That's value. Uh, Having less power interruption, being for us being able to restore them very quickly is a very valuable thing, not just for individuals, but for businesses. Having all of the programs that we have to attract businesses here. Number one, site selection magazine. Chicago is number one in attracting businesses. The entire state of Illinois, number two. Bringing businesses here, investment, jobs, and growth, increasing the tax base. That's value to our customers. So to us, our customers, it's always a challenge when bills are going up and there's general increases in costs across the board because of inflation that are really not within our control. But those that we can control, we try our best to do so. With our low income discount rate, especially for those who are having difficulty paying their bills, we have a plethora of programs and we are out there meeting them where they are. We go to the communities in our service territory to make sure that they see us face to face, and that we are listening to them and listening to their concerns.
Makes a lot of sense. It's one of the funniest parts of working in utilities is the best thing that can happen is kind of that nothing happens, right? Especially with
Yeah,
regard to the expectations of customers and consumers, the reputation that you have with those people, the best thing that can happen is that their power just stays on, and nobody really thinks
exactly.
twice about that. So with this idea of reliability, it's a good time to get into that last, of the 4 that I wanna talk about in terms of the four-year plan that you have recently put out. Optimizing for reliability is a big part of this. We have talked throughout this conversation about the strides that ComEd has made in terms of reliability. What's the secret? What is the secret sauce to get to being the most reliable utility in the country? How do you invest to ensure that happens? How do you prioritize things to ensure that that happens? Can you walk me through some of the strategy?
Well, since 2011, we've improved our reliability close to 80%. And what it took, probably the secret sauce is discipline and consistency. So, number one, we have developed a system where we know how to prioritize and where to put the dollars so that we get the biggest bang for our buck. That's number one. We've developed a very sophisticated system that says if we put our money, we have a big grid. We're the fourth largest utility in the United States. So we can't upgrade the grid across the board. We have to prioritize and put our money in certain spots that really produce the biggest return. So that's one. Second, we have to execute that work really well. ComEd is known as one of the utilities that really execute work. I give you an example. Last year, we deployed $3.5 billion in capital, and we were able to hit our target with about a 1% variance. Now, mind you, $3.5 billion, it's comprised of multiple hundreds and hundreds of projects. To be able to deliver that on budget, basically right on bullseye at 3.5 billion, is takes hard work and execution. And I credit the men and women of ComEd. They're very good at planning and executing project, and it develops and it builds trust with our regulators and stakeholders that when we say we're going to invest X amount of dollars, we do it on time, we do it on budget, and we do it with quality.
Certainly some very good advice there for people who are in decision-making roles at utilities. One other element of the reliability conversation too that I would love to get your thoughts on. You mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that a lot of the decisions that you have to make are to be in line with, as you've mentioned before and as we've talked about throughout this conversation, economic development in the region, but also climate goals in the region. So with regard to reliability, knowing that ComEd does not own generation, how do you ensure that, climate goals are part of the conversation as you're thinking about optimizing for reliability and the power mix of the future? making sure that those two things can both pursue the same end goal, which is the power stays on. Talk to me a little bit about what that looks like.
Well, we are fortunate that our policymakers here have passed laws that are consistent in both achieving our clean energy goals and economic development goals of the state. So the policies have been set by our policymakers. Our role now is to make our investments, our prioritization of how to do that consistent with the policies that have been set in our state. So, we will support, for example, the integrated resource planning that they'll be doing this year. I'm sure that the state will come up with, okay, here's the gap, and here are the recommendations that we are going to be looking that will meet the need, consistent with our policies at the lowest cost. uh, think of on the demand side. Again, my prediction is that battery storage is going to be a big deal here pretty soon, just like community solar. My prediction is that every solar installation here will have a battery component in it. um, and we're going to be thinking about, do we need to put batteries in our substations and other locations of the grid? So those are just, some examples, I think, of what you're going to see here in Illinois. But we're fortunate that there's alignment between the policymakers and the utilities here, and even the energy, market participants, energy solutions providers.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with all of this in mind, we've covered a lot today. We have had a winding conversation. We have talked about many different elements of your business and your strategy and your responsibilities as CEO. I'm curious what your advice might be for other utility leaders this day. It's a lot to balance, fundamental shifts, big challenges, big opportunities. Do you have any advice for maybe some fellow C-suite or decision makers or leaders out there during this specific moment or era for utilities?
I always say, make incremental improvements every day. Because if you think about the challenge too far out, for example, in my case, I mentioned to you, we have about 100 or so data center applications. More are coming in. It's over 30,000 megawatts or over 30 gigawatts. If you just start thinking about that, you're going to say, oh my God, it's impossible. It can't be that we're be able to connect all of these data centers to our system, right? And that's not, and then you get discouraged. My advice, and I tell this to our team all the time, is yes, we will plan. We have a 10-year plan. We just issued our 10-year plan late last year, ComEd's long range strategy, which is between now and 2035. And that's important. You want to put a marker on where you want to be 10 years from now. But I think what's more important than after you set something like that is just make incremental improvements every day, execute your plan every day, every week, every month, every year, because things are going to change along the way, and you have to be agile. You have to be adaptable to changes. We weren't even talking about data centers when I came here in 2021. We only start talking about it towards the end of 2022. So things can change very quickly, and you have to be agile and adaptable. But consistency and discipline and hard work, the uh, the normal stuff, the normal ingredients to success.
And I think good ingredients to success, regardless of what industry you're in, certainly in the utility industry, those are broadly very applicable. I'm a huge proponent of doing your best to commit to being 1% better every day, every week. You pick a time frame, and then you look back a year later and suddenly you're functioning at a totally different
It
level.
compounds,
Yeah.
the power of compounding.
Absolutely, and managing that with long-term planning, I know is no simple feat, but it has been really wonderful, Gil, to get a real up-close perspective and look at how you're doing it, how you and your team are managing all of this at once. So thank you so much for sharing all of this with me today. If you're ready, we will now get into our lightning round, have a little fun to close us
Great.
out with just a couple
I'm ready.
questions. All right, I love it. I love it. So the goal here is to keep the answers short, answer in a word, a sentence or two, and we'll have some fun. So my first question for you here, can you tell me something people don't know or might be surprised to hear about being a utility CEO?
Surprise. It's a 24/7, 365 job. I don't know whether that's a surprise.
Well, we're grateful for all of the many hours that you spend ensuring that these lights stay on. My second question for you, what is your favorite way to spend a day off? If you are getting, maybe 24 of the the hours, off from a week, how would you choose to spend it?
I want to spend it with my wife and our daughter. Our daughter turned 20 yesterday. She's at college, a sophomore at American University, studying journalism, by the way. And so spending time with them as much as I can when I can is definitely my top priority.
I love that, and from one journalism major to another, I hope you will give her my best and tell her happy birthday. And
I
my
will.
my final question for you today, Gil, do you have a prediction? You made one in the conversation that was pretty good. A prediction for the next, 5 to 10 years in the utility or energy industry that might surprise our listeners. What's your hot take about the future?
I think that the amount of change in our industry over the next 10 years will be more significant than all the changes that has happened to the grid since Thomas Edison invented electricity in the 1800s.
All right. I like that. That's a good quotable one. I appreciate it. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of the conversation, Gil. Thank you once again for joining me today on Power Perspectives, again, for returning to the show and for sharing all of this with our audience. I'm sure people are going to find a ton of value in everything that you have brought to the table today. So I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kinsey, and I want to be a regular.
Of course, we'll have our standing appointment to get you back on every now and then. This has been really fun. Thank you so much, Gil, and thank you to all of you for tuning in to another episode of Power Perspectives. I'm Kinsey Grant Baker, and I will see you next time.